Good morning, or afternoon, or perhaps even evening, depending on where you are. I'm Kieran O'Neill. I'm a research and policy analyst at ICTC. If you don't already know of us, ICTC is the Information and Communications Technology Council. We are a nonprofit national center of expertise for the economy, with over 25 years of experience delivering evidence-based research, practical policy advice, and innovative capacity-building solutions for the Canadian digital economy. I would like to welcome everyone watching to our special event on smart government. There have been a range of exciting developments in different aspects of smart government in the last few years, whether digital identities, COVID tracing apps, e-democracy tools, you name it. Most of these developments have privacy considerations. So for the next hour, we're focusing specifically on privacy, and we're lucky to have one of the world's leading privacy experts with us for this. So I'm very excited to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Dr. Cavourkian. Anne served an unprecedented 3 terms as the Information and Privacy Commissioner of Ontario, where she created Privacy by Design, a framework that seeks to proactively embed privacy into the design of IT, networked infrastructure, and business practices. Privacy by Design is now considered an international standard and has been translated into 40 languages. Dr. Cavourkian is currently the Distinguished Expert in Residence at Ryerson University, leading the Privacy by Design Center of Excellence. She is also a Senior Fellow at Ryerson University and a Faculty Fellow at Arizona State University. Dr. Cavourkian is the author of 2 books and has received numerous awards recognizing her leadership in privacy, including being named one of the top 25 women of influence in Canada. When we spoke with Dr. Cavourkian before the event, she had us just totally, immediately, completely captivated, and I'm sure she'll do the same for you. So I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Cavourkian.
Thank you so much, Kieran. It was a very kind introduction, and I'm delighted to be here with you today to tell you about the positives associated with privacy. It drives me crazy when people always have such a negative view of it in terms of how it's going to impact business or restrict your access to much needed information. Privacy by Design, which I created a long time ago, is all about a win-win. We have to get rid of the zero-sum either-or mindset of privacy versus security, or privacy versus business interest, or privacy versus government. It's both. You want a positive sum approach, privacy and I should tell you, in terms of my introduction, I recently actually started a consulting service because so many people for years have been saying, please give us consulting, come and help us. So that's what I've been doing. I now head up the Global Privacy and Security by Design Center. And, business has been booming. It's amazing how much interest there is in privacy and how much people realize it is under siege. Surveillance is mounting at an alarming pace. And we're going to address that. We're going to address how you can ensure that our privacy can be protected and the functionality you need achieved successfully. You make privacy work for you. But I always like to start at the beginning. So if you don't mind, I'm going to refer to my slide deck, and I'm going to start by, I always want to start by dispelling the myths, which is in my first slide. Next slide, please. I always say, let's dispel the myths, of which there are so many. But one of the greatest myths in the next slide is privacy is not about secrecy. It drives me crazy when people say, well, if you have nothing to hide, what's the problem? The problem is that's not what freedom is about. The fact that there's somehow an expectation that you're supposed to share your information with the state, with government, with private sector, why? Why would that be the first principle? It's wrong. In the next slide, you'll see what privacy is really about. Privacy is all about control. In the next slide, I talk about how it's all about personal control. It's essential that the user, the data subject, the individual to whom the personal information relates, be in control of their information. They have to be free to choose to whom they wish to disclose it and how they wish to have it used. The Germans have a wonderful term for this called informational self-determination, that it should be the individual who determines the fate of his or her personal information. I love that. And it's no accident that Germany is the leading privacy and data protection country in the world. It's no accident they had to endure the abuses of the Third Reich. And when that ended, they said, never again will we allow the state to control our information and strip us of our privacy and our freedom. And they've stood by that. They're amazing. I've always looked up to Germany. In the next slide, I also like to talk about how privacy forms the foundation of our freedom. It's a necessary condition for societal prosperity, well-being, all of the innovation, the creativity, the crazy blue sky thinking that we have. You can't do that without a solid foundation of privacy and freedom. And privacy, it's the essence of freedom. Human rights, property rights, civil liberties, none of these conceptual engines of innovation and creativity could exist in any meaningful manner without privacy. And I love to tell this story about Steve Jobs, the brilliant creator of Apple. He used to buy a new white Mercedes every 6 months, less a day. 6 months less a day, he would take his existing car to the dealership and buy same make, same model, take it home, have that for 6 months less a day, then go back to the dealership. And he kept doing this until he unfortunately died. And you're thinking, why is he doing this? He didn't want to be tracked. He didn't want to be surveilled. He didn't want anyone to be able to follow him in terms of the license plate number. So he never got a license plate number. I love this wild blue sky thinking that people love freedom. Unfortunately, after he died, California changed the laws, and now you have to get a license plate number almost immediately. But I digress. Surveillance is the antithesis of privacy. One of the negative consequences of surveillance is it just shrinks your cognitive bandwidth. Sorry, I use that kind of language. I'm a psychologist. That's my background. And I just know it makes you go inward and you're looking over your shoulder, and you can't have the crazy, wild thinking that breeds innovation and creativity, makes you go inside. Surveillance has so many negatives associated with it. We have to control it, and we will, and we are. So in the next slide, I talk about privacy by design. This is something I created in my first term as Privacy Commissioner of Ontario. I was commissioner for 3 terms, and when I first started, it was a little, I don't want to say tense, but since I'm not a lawyer, I brought a very different approach to privacy. The brilliant lawyers who were there and were amazing, they just were awesome. And they believed, understandably, in taking the traditional view to regulatory compliance to privacy. Once the privacy harm has taken place, you go in, you investigate, you see if the law has been transgressed, and you offer a remedy immediately. Very valuable, no question. But I wanted a proactive means of preventing the privacy harms from arising. I wanted like a medical model of prevention. Let's avoid the harms by having privacy protective measures embedded into our operations, baked into the code. This is what I wanted. So it took a little while because this is quite different from a legal approach to privacy. But we married the two, and I'll tell you about that shortly. And we had such great success with it. In the next slide, you'll see that in 2010, privacy by design was unanimously passed as an international standard by the International Assembly of Privacy Commissioners and Data Protection Authorities. Commissioners have a conference once a year, usually in Europe. It was in Jerusalem in 2010. And at the end of a 3 or 4 day session, we have a half-day closed session where commissioners are allowed to bring forward resolutions that the entire assembly of commissioners from all around the world vote on. So that year, I brought forth the resolution that privacy by design should complement regulatory compliance, which is after the fact. And to my amazement, it was unanimously passed. And I say amazement because, as I said, lawyers is a very different approach. And all of the lawyers who are the commissioners there, they're brilliant, what I call lawyers. They love drilling down into Section 29, Sub 2, Part A, and applying that to the fact situation. Brilliant. But as I said, I didn't think it was enough. And afterwards, when I talked to my fellow commissioners to thank them, what I realized is they didn't think it was enough either. And in the next slide, please, this is what they said. They said, look, we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg. The majority of privacy harms are not being addressed. They're at the base of the iceberg. In this day and age of massive social media, everyone connecting online, sharing information all over the place, we're not seeing the majority of the harms. So they said the privacy breaches are largely remaining unchallenged, unregulated, and unknown. And so we have to complement that. Privacy laws by themselves are no longer sufficient, and we need to complement them with a proactive means of preventing the harm if we want to ensure the future of privacy, which of course we all do. I've had such success with this. It's been, in the next slide, please, you'll see it's been translated into 40 languages. It is literally followed all around the world. It just makes my heart warm. I mean, not a week goes by I don't hear from some jurisdiction telling me what they're doing in their respective countries and how they're following privacy by design, and I just love it. And Brazil just came out with a new law a few months ago. They're using it. I mean, it just goes on and on. So let me tell you, what exactly is privacy by design? That's what we need to know. The next slide, I talk about the two essentials to privacy by design. I've talked about the first one. You have to be proactive because you want to prevent the harms from arising, much like a medical model of prevention. But banishing zero-sum models is absolutely critical. In the next slide, I expand on that a bit. I call it dated win-lose zero-sum models. Basically, what a zero-sum model does is you can only have a positive gain in one area, security, always to the detriment of the other area, privacy, so that the two total to a sum of zero, plus positive, negative, zero. It's always win-lose. Only one side can win. Win-lose, either or. And I have to tell you a story. When I was a graduate student at the University of Toronto, Anatole Rappaport was the gentleman who created game theory, zero-sum, positive sum, etc. He was brilliant, and I used to fawn over him. He was just so brilliant. But I remember saying to him, I said, Professor Rappaport, why do people embrace zero-sum models and always gravitate towards zero-sum? For me, I'm the eternal optimist. I want positive sum, two positive gains at the same time. Win-win. Wouldn't you rather have that? Why do they all fall for zero-sum models? And he said, Anne, it's simple. Zero-sum is the lazy man's way out. It's much easier to focus on success in one area, forget about the other area, but it is so short-lived. He said a positive sum win-win model is far more effective and gets you far greater returns because then you have multiple positive gains. And it's as simple and as difficult as getting rid of the privacy versus security to privacy and security. We will get to that. I'm going to tell you now in the next slide, just in case you think, well, maybe it sounds interesting, but this isn't doable. Yes, it is. I remember talking to brilliant data scientists and technologists. I remember talking to Bruce Schneier, brilliant, just, he has such an amazing mind, a cryptographer. And he said, Anne, it's not an either or. This zero-sum model involves unnecessary trade-offs. They're false dichotomies that you can only have one interest versus another. He said that's nonsense. Yeah, it's harder to do plus, win-win, but the returns are far greater, just like Professor Rappaport told me so many years ago. I'm going to walk you through. There are 7 foundational principles to privacy by design. So let me walk you through those and then we'll continue. And then in the next slide, I talk about the 7 foundational principles, and I've already covered a number of them, so this won't take long. Proactive, not reactive, of course. We want to prevent the harm, not just remediate. Let me spend a minute on number 2, privacy as the default setting. This is critical. It's a game changer. Because what it does, right now, still largely speaking, companies and governments operate in an opt-out manner. So if you want privacy, you, the data subject, you have to scour all the terms of service and read all the legalese in the privacy policy to find the opt-out box that says, do not use my information for any purpose other than the primary purpose of the data collection, the one I consented to. It takes forever to do that. And people don't do it anymore, not because they don't want it. Privacy is at an all-time high in terms of concern. In the last 2 years, all of the public opinion polls, Pew Internet Research, et cetera, have come in at the 90 percentile in terms of concern for privacy. 90% very concerned about privacy, 92% concerned about loss of control over their personal information. Huge. What privacy is the default setting does, it flips it on its head. It says to people, you don't have to search for how to protect your privacy. You don't have to search for an opt-out box. No. We give you privacy automatically. It's the default setting. We may only use your personal information for the primary purpose of the data collection that you consented to. Full stop. We can't use it for anything else. Later on, if a secondary use arises that we would like to use your personal information for, we have to come back to you, the data subject, and ask for your positive consent again for this new secondary use. This is a game changer. People love it because it builds trust like no other. And there's such a trust deficit right now. It's just going through the roof. Privacy is the default setting. We automatically give you privacy. You don't have to ask for it. Total game changer. And this builds trusted business relationships like no other. Okay, privacy embedded into design. Surely this speaks for itself. If you embed privacy into your design settings, bake it into the code, make it an essential component of your features, then you can't forget about it. It's embedded throughout your design and it's always there. It's perfect. And I've already spent a lot of time talking about full functionality. I can't emphasize it enough. Get rid of the zero-sum mindset. It is such a dated model. So yesterday, positive sum, win-win, multiple positive gains. That's what you want. Let me speak about security for a moment. While the term privacy subsumes a much broader set of protections than security alone, in this day and age with daily hacking and online activity, if you don't have a solid foundation of privacy, if you don't have a solid foundation of security, end-to-end with full lifecycle protection, you're not going to have any privacy. So you want privacy, you have to start with a solid foundation of security from end to end. Visibility and transparency. This should speak for itself. You've got to keep your operations open to your data subjects. You collect their personal information, so you have to ensure that they have access to what you have on them. And the beauty of this is, so many companies have told me this, and government departments, they love it because what they say is, when we grant individuals access to their own information, they tell us if we've got the wrong information, if the information we have is flawed, or there are mistakes, or it's no longer accurate. They love it because companies say, look, we have details on thousands and thousands of customers and individuals. We can't check every piece of information to see if it's accurate or not, but if you give access to the individual to their own personal information, they'll know in a heartbeat if you've got the wrong information on them, and they'll notify you and they'll correct it. So it increases the quality, the accuracy of the information you have. Another total win. And respect for user privacy, keep it user-centric. This could have been the first principle, because when you have it focused on the user, everything else just flows from it. And you will build such trusted business relationships, it will be a total game changer. That's what I hear again and again for those who have been certified with privacy by design in their operations. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, it sounds interesting, but surely, I can't work in real life all the time. Au contraire. In the next slide, please, you'll see that we operationalize privacy by design in this paper, which you can get on our website, It's a compilation of 22 papers we wrote with all of the major tech companies. Think of any major tech company: Microsoft, Intel, HPE, Oracle, IBM. I mean, we could go on and on. We did papers with all of them in all of these different areas. We wanted to make sure that this was doable. So surveillance cameras, obviously, biometrics. I'm going to talk about biometrics at the end. Smart meters, mobile communications, RFIDs, remote home healthcare. One example, remote home healthcare. So important. With our aging population, the elderly are choosing to stay in their homes, even if they are living alone, but they may need help from time to time as they're getting older, instead of going to a nursing home or something. So what Intel did, totally privacy protective manner, they developed these sensors you could put throughout your home. For example, you could put one on your bed. And if you get up in the middle of the night to use a restroom, but you don't return within a predetermined period of time that you have decided on, then the sensor goes off and then help arrives at your home. Maybe you took a fall, maybe something happened. And all of this is in a completely privacy protective manner. You control who has access to your data. Like 3 people at Intel would have access to the sensor information that sends out these signals. Nobody else. You decide everything. If you want it, if you don't want it, how broadly you want it, who, and the message that is sent from the sensor is all encrypted, and it can only go to the 3 people that you have acknowledged and agreed to having serve you. So it's just amazing. Take a look. Privacy by design is very, very real. And it's not just here. As I said, it's followed all around the world. In the next slide, I remember JIPDEC, the Japanese Information Processing Development Center, wrote me this lovely letter. And they said, you know, we've heard from Japan's private sector companies that we need to insist on the principle of positive sum, not zero sum, and become enlightened with privacy by design. And I thought, gosh, if the Japanese, whose first language is not English, if they can embrace positive sum versus zero sum, I thought, we got to go with this. We have to really expand this messaging because it makes such a difference. Now, I'm sure some of you are saying, okay, but what's it going to cost me? Well, obviously, there's a cost associated with doing this proactively. But in the next slide, please, you will see that the cost to doing it proactively is a fraction of the cost you will incur, which I guarantee if you don't do this. These days, when there's a data breach or privacy infraction, they're not just lawsuits, they're class action lawsuits that are filed, costing millions upon millions of dollars. But the damage to your brand, the damage to your reputation may be irreparable. That's what you need to preserve at all costs. If you have loss of consumer confidence and trust, it's gone. It's just gone. And you're not going to get it back. One example, a number of years ago, maybe 4 years ago, I can't remember exactly, Target, which was like the Bay or Eaton's or something like that. Target at that point was this wonderful store, primarily, well, exclusively in the United States. They expanded to Canada, as I said, about 4 or 5 years ago. And they were doing very well here. You know, they had lots of products for sale and people were very interested in them. There was a massive data breach in the US. Target just suffered millions in losses. The CEO of Target in the US, he left. He just quit. He resigned. He said, I can't restore the harm. The president of Target Canada was fired just outright. And within a few months, all the Target stores that had been opened in Canada, they shut down, business went under so quickly. They couldn't restore the damage. So it's very, very important. Yes, there's a small cost associated with doing it proactively, but it is minimal compared to the costs you incur reactively after you have a data breach or a privacy infraction. There's just no comparison. And you can also say to your customers the lengths you're going to protect their data. People love that. And it builds such loyalty. It's amazing. Okay, let me switch gears in the next slide, please, to the EU. In the European Union, in 2018, the General Data Protection Regulation came into effect. And it was, debated for many years and went through a long process, but it was amazing because it strengthens privacy laws throughout Europe, and it gives their citizens total control over their personal information. And as I mentioned, privacy is all about personal control. It is amazing. And one of the reasons I loved the GDPR, especially, in the next slide, please, is that they also included my privacy by design framework. It's called data protection by design, as all privacy commissioners are data protection commissioners in the EU, but it's the same thing. And they included privacy as the default setting, the second foundational principle, which I told you was the game changer. This was huge. I cannot tell you the effect this had. All of a sudden, everybody around the world is trying to upgrade their existing privacy laws to come into the GDPR's level of protection so they can continue to engage in trade and business with the EU without fear of repercussion. And until the GDPR came into effect, Canada, we always had essential equivalence, which is called essential equivalence, our laws with theirs. But once the EU enacted GDPR, we no longer had essential equivalence. So we have to do something. In the next slide, please. I love this. I had to quote this article from Information Age. They said, it's not too much of a stretch to say that if you implement privacy by design, you've mastered the GDPR. Well, I assure you, there's much more to the GDPR than privacy by design. But I think the point she was trying to reflect here was that if you follow privacy by design, you already have such a the strongest privacy regime possible that you will most likely satisfy all of the other requirements of the GDPR. So in the next slide, our Federal Privacy Commissioner of Canada, Daniel Therrien, he said, okay, we got to upgrade our laws. We're no longer essentially equivalent with the GDPR, as we always have been. And they said we need to upgrade PIPEDA, our federal private sector legislation. This was enacted in the early 2000s. It's dated. And we also need to integrate approaches such as privacy by design. And he said, I mean, after all, that was created by a Canadian and Cavourkian. They put it in their law. We need to put it into ours. So the federal government seemed to listen. In the next slide, please, you'll see that the federal government wrote this paper. They launched Towards Privacy by Design in 2018, which seemed to indicate that they wanted PIPEDA, the federal private sector legislation, enhanced to include privacy by design. You think they've done that? They haven't, but that was their intention. I always say you got to walk the talk. This is one example where the talk was not walked, but we'll get to that at another time. Okay, let me continue. I just want you to know that we offer privacy by design certification now. In the next slide, you'll see that it's in conjunction with KPMG. So if you're a company or a government department that wants to be certified, you come to me, indicate your request, and with your consent, I send KPMG to visit your operations and look under the hood, if you will. And then if you get certified, that will speak volumes to how strongly you protect privacy. Your citizens, your customers will love you for it, and it'll be great. I've heard back from so many companies that have been certified that it works so well for them. And it builds such trusted business relationships, which are largely lacking. And in the next slide, I just also want you to know that I offer a privacy by design course at Ryerson. I'm no longer at Ryerson, but I do this, remotely, an online course that people from all over the world take. I mean, it's amazing. And I just want to give you an idea of one more course that is following in the next month or two. I've created a trust, before I go there, I created a Trust by Design course, which I don't have a slide for yet because we just finished it. But it's all about trust. Trust is what is missing. So everyone kept saying to me, how do we extend privacy by design? So I thought, we can extend it into trust by design. So stay tuned. If you just keep an eye on my website, you'll see the link to it that you can check out. Okay, now next slide, please. I'm going to talk about COVID, which just disturbs me so much on so many levels in terms of the push for contact tracing. Contact tracing, see, here's what happens with privacy laws. When there are emergency situations like terrorist incidents or pandemics, laws have a clause that says that under emergency measures, we can do additional things like collect personal information, use it in ways that were never anticipated. But the risks to that are enormous. In the next slide, please. There were 300 experts, epidemiologists from 26 countries from all over the world, signed a joint letter sent to governments that unless they build contact tracing technology in a privacy protective manner, it will fail. They said such apps can otherwise be repurposed to enable unwarranted discrimination and surveillance. It is vital we do not create a tool that enables large-scale data collection on the population now or at a later time. This is critical. This was in The Guardian. It's being followed all around the world. So we also had, in the next slide, there was also a second open letter from experts fearing that contact tracing would be used to surveil people. 177 cybersecurity experts warned that the British government's contact tracing app could be used to surveil people, even after the coronavirus has ended. And they were forced to stop using this and shift to one based on the Apple-Google API. In the next slide, please. Apple and Google partnered together, which they rarely do, to develop, and they didn't call it a contact tracing form. They call it an exposure notification API. Totally privacy protective, which would leave no identifiable personal data whatsoever. And Apple contacted me on 2 occasions and walked me through all the code because they know I always say trust but verify, look under the hood. I had to see the code. They showed me the code. Code was brilliant. It was essentially saying, look, this is an app that you will download, any of you who wants to upload it. It's totally voluntary. You download it on your mobile device. What it will do is it will alert you. It will notify you if you become exposed within 6 feet or 2 meters to someone who has tested positive for COVID. That's it. It's going to tell you if you're coming close to someone who's COVID positive. And then what you do is up to you. You can choose to go to your family doctor. You can choose to go to a public health authority to be tested, whatever you want. Entirely up to you. No one knows that you even have it, that you've downloaded it, that you're looking, any of that. It is amazing. And I rarely speak out in favor of these things. I spoke out in favor of this. And I worked with the Ontario government here in Ontario, since I live in Toronto, to develop what's called the COVID Alert. That was the app we developed here in Ontario. Again, totally privacy protective, based on the Apple-Google framework that alerts people who choose to download it in Ontario, whether they've been within 6 feet, 2 meters of someone who's COVID positive. And then Canada federally took our Ontario model of COVID Alert, and they used it across Canada. It's available to anyone who wants to download it in Canada, totally for free, and free of any personal information being collected. I should tell you, Germany, which is, as I said, the leading privacy data protection country in the world, and their citizens know the lengths Germany goes to protect data. So they really believe in the government protecting their data through the commissioner, the data protection commissioner there. They did the same thing, developed an app based on the Apple-Google framework, and within 24 hours, they had 4.1 million downloads. Can you believe that? It was just amazing. And that's soared now. I mean, it's more than tripled by now. It's essential to have this. And I'm going to tell you about the good health pass that I'm working on with a number of people. It creates a blueprint for interoperable digital health pass systems to restore travel. As you know, in this day and age, there's no travel. And people are starting to say, well, we're going to start traveling, but we need to have proof that you haven't tested positive, that you've had a test for COVID and you're fine, you're negative. And others are saying the vaccine passports, once everyone's being vaccinated, we want to make sure that you've been vaccinated before you can travel or whatever. I hate this whole model because it reveals so much personal information. The IATA in Europe, there's the IATA travel pass, there's hundreds of these appearing. So in creating the Good Health Pass, this is a blueprint literally for how to do it in an interoperable way so that you can have a digital health pass that will show if you've been tested or not, and if you've had a vaccination or not, all that, but it will be completely under your control. It'll be decentralized. The information will reside on your digital media, maybe on your iPhone or whatever, your computer, whatever, and it would not it's totally decentralized. It's not going to be retained in a centralized manner. And when you go to the airport, for example, you can choose to reveal it to the attendant who can look at it and say, yep, she's been tested, no problem. She's been vaccinated, no problem, whatever. But they don't get to keep the data. They just get to view it. They can, write it on a piece of paper or whatever they need to do, but that's it. Totally privacy protective, totally under your control in a decentralized manner. We have to do this. Otherwise, this information is going to be floating around everywhere. It will be a nightmare. Okay, I'm going to go very quickly now because I've taken way too long to speak about all of this. So in the next slide, I'm going to talk about the importance of data minimization and de-identification. In the next slide, I talk about data de-identification or data minimization simply means stripping personal identifiers associated with your data. So you can still have the data, but it won't be linked to Ann Cavourkian or your social insurance number or anything. All personal identifiers get stripped. In the next slide, I wrote about this years ago when I was commissioner with CalNet LMM, who is brilliant, one of the brilliant professionals who has created the most sensitive de-identification system imaginable. He's a professor at University of Ottawa, but he has created amazing ways to anonymize data using synthetic data and other tools. It's amazing. In the next slide, I talk about how vital it is to have strong de-identification because you have to have that to minimize the risk of re-identification, and this can be done. But I also want to caution you. In the next slide, I talk about the myth of zero risk. Please, let's not talk about zero risk. It doesn't exist anywhere. You send your children out to play or to go to school, they're walking, God forbid something might happen, might get into an accident or whatever. You do whatever you can to minimize risk. And that's what we do here and always. Get rid of perfection, zero risk, and minimize risk. We can minimize the risk of re-identification to less than 0.05%. In the next slide, I'm just going to jump to the next two slides. You can read these on your own, different standards of de-identification. And then I talk about in the next slide, once again on the next slide, how you can innovate with de-identified data. Because once the data have been de-identified, anonymized, then you can use the aggregated data, depersonalized data in a variety of different ways, which will just bring enormous value to your work. Remember, privacy and data utility. We can do both. In the next slide, please, I'm going to end by talking about biometric encryption, which is so amazing. I love biometric encryption. Let me just explain it to you in English, and then you'll have the slides. Biometrics are very important. They are your fingerprints, your iris scans, etc. They're also very revealing. You don't want your biometrics in other people's hands. What biometric encryption does is it uses the strength of your biometric, the fingerprint, for example, to encrypt some other data. The other data can be anything. It can be a 100-digit PIN number, whatever, meaningless number. But your personal biometric is never retained, never collected. And the beauty of this is if somehow the system got hacked and the biometrically encrypted data got opened up, what would they get? They wouldn't get your biometric. They wouldn't get your fingerprint, your iris scan, nothing. They would get this nonsense 100-digit data screen or whatever it is you chose. It's a brilliant system. In the next slide, I talk about it in terms of English, untraceable biometrics, which are unique, totally irreversible, and 100% privacy. In the next slide, I talk about the unbelievable benefits of biometric encryption. Code breaking becomes a security issue, not a privacy issue, because your personal information, your biometric, is never, ever retained. And that's a game changer. And you can also enhance security through a variety of means. You can have challenge response systems, you can encrypt the data, you can do so many things. In the next slide, please, I talk about the advantages of biometric encryption. We've already talked about data minimization, because no retention of your biometric template is ever made. It minimizes the potential for unauthorized secondary uses, loss of the data, misuse, you name it. And once again, as I keep saying, privacy is all about control, personal control, which is totally maximized. You can keep your biometric data totally private, and you can generate or change unique anonymous account identifiers. You can encrypt your own data. You can do whatever you want. And also, as I mentioned, security is enhanced. It's amazing. So everything is enhanced. Communication, data security, it's all enhanced. In the next slide, please. This is a paper that we wrote when I was privacy commissioner on the enormous strengths of biometric encryption. How is it? It's a totally positive sum approach. I keep talking about privacy, and this is all about privacy and biometrics, privacy and security, privacy and strong authentication, multiple positives here. And this can help to overcome the prevailing zero-sum either-or mindset by effectively transforming your biometric into your own private key that no one else gains access to. That's pretty big. And we have another paper as well, in the next slide, please, that I wrote a number of years ago as well when I was commissioner, with the OLG, believe it or not, how you could use biometric encryption as proof of concept. You can take a look at it if you want to take a read. I'm running out of time, so I don't want to extend this, but I just want to assure you that there's so many ways that this can be explored. In the next slide, please, let me end by just wrapping this up and reminding you once again that both privacy and security risks can be managed by proactively embedding them into the principles of privacy by design. We want to prevent the privacy harms from arising. We want to avoid the data breaches, not just offer remedies after they've taken place. So that's why my focus is always on prevention. It's much easier and far more cost-effective to build in both privacy and security. You need both up front rather than after the fact. And it also reflects the most ethical treatment of personal data. There's so much talk of ethics out there now, and nothing could be more ethical than putting the individual in control of their own data, in control of the use and disclosure of their personal data. I'll just repeat this for the last time. Get rid of zero-sum thinking, either or. It's so yesterday. Embrace doubly enabling positive-sum thinking, privacy and security, privacy and data utility. You want government to get smart? You have to do both. You can't just discard privacy in your pursuit of all these other very important areas, but you need privacy embedded, interwoven throughout. And I'll never forget one of my colleagues, Kai Rannenberg in Germany, he used to say to me, well, if people are smart, they'll lead with privacy by design. But most of them probably won't be that smart, and they might just get privacy by chance, or far worse, they go privacy by disaster. And that's why you'll get a privacy commissioner knocking on your door is the last thing you want. So let's get rid of that. And I'm going to conclude my remarks now. I'll just mention in the next slide, if you have any interest, I have a large Twitter following, and I tweet every morning usually between 5:30 and 6 a.m., the latest stories of the day, a number of which come from Europe, etc. So if you have any interest, take a look, consider following me, and you'll see what's going on. And I want to thank you for listening to this lengthy talk, and I'm going to switch it back to Kieran now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Cavourkian. Thank you so much. That was really wonderful. I know I learned a lot, and we have a number of questions from the audience that hopefully we can go through a few of those here.
Of course.
Great. So one of them says, all levels of government in Canada are currently buying surveillance tech despite massive flaws, sometimes against their own privacy laws. How should control be asserted to prohibit their use?
First of all, raise awareness. Anytime you become aware of this massive explosion of surveillance and surveillance tech being purchased by various governments, alert whoever is involved and file complaints. And that may seem not possible, but let me give you an example. Law enforcement agencies, police forces across Canada, last year were buying into Clearview AI horrible programs. Clearview AI slurped 3.3 billion facial images off of Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, etc., and put this into a huge, huge database. And they've been selling it to police forces. And police forces, love it, it seems. But they've been buying it without the authority of the head, the police chief. When we learned about this here in Toronto last year, the police chief was alerted. He looked into it right away. He said, oh my God, I didn't know they were buying this. He stopped it. He ended the program, everything. And that happened in Edmonton and a number of other jurisdictions. So transparency is critical to raising the bar about this kind of surveillance. Most of the public don't want it. Governments are doing this with taxpayer dollars, and taxpayers don't want this. And they don't need it. The unfortunate thing is, if a crime has been committed, law enforcement, if they have probable cause, they can go to a judge and get a warrant, and that enables them to gain access to lots of information. So they don't need these horrible surveillance technologies. And there's a lot of facial recognition bans that are now taking place. Facial recognition is just plagued with false positives in excess of 80%, and it's inaccurate. So a lot of, in the United States especially, local law enforcement agencies and different jurisdictions, over 30 of them have put an outright ban on the use of facial recognition. So raise the bar, bringing it to the attention of someone other than those obviously who are doing it, because they seem to be enamored with it, and complain and bring this to a stop.
Thank you. If I can just run through a few more questions here. Another one brings up the introduction of a bill in the US to create a national data privacy standard. One feature of this is requiring opt-in consent from consumers for the use of their sensitive personal data that may be used in ways not expected by consumers. And do you think this is even possible?
Is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? No. Would I love to see it? Absolutely. See, the beauty of positive consent is people become aware of what is being contemplated in terms of making your information used for a variety of purposes. The problem with opt-out, which is negative consent, is people have to know about what's going on before they can say, no, I don't want you to do that. With opt-in, you can't use someone's information without their positive consent to begin with. So total game changer. Individuals have to know upfront how their information is going to be used, to whom it's going to be disclosed, and if they consent to this. That's fabulous. It is wonderful. It allows people true choice. It's totally privacy by design in terms of making privacy the default setting, that governments and private sector entities cannot use your personal information without your positive consent, which is opt-in. Now, what is the likelihood of this taking place in the US? flip a coin. It's a very noble goal. I don't know if it's going to go in that direction, but government departments can choose to do this on their own if they want to, and private sector entities. It builds trust, as I said, like no other. And so many companies are now going in this direction. So stay tuned in the US. But as I mentioned, in the US, over 30 jurisdictions have placed a ban on facial recognition because they said it's a complete invasion of privacy. It obtains your facial image without any notice or certainly no consent. And it is largely inaccurate. 81% false positives in the UK, where they have facial recognition cameras everywhere. It's a lose-lose. We should get rid of it.
Just a couple more, two questions that are related, I suppose. One is, how is privacy by design adopted differently by different stakeholders? And another is, does privacy by design uptake differ interprovincially? Privacy
by design has not been adopted provincially or federally in Canada. It's largely used by the private sector. I wish it would be adopted by governments here in Canada, but I have yet to see that happen. That's why I was so disappointed that federally, I truly thought in 2018, when they said towards privacy by design, the federal government, I really thought they were going to include that in the new bill that they released, which is a nightmare. Unfortunately, they didn't go in that direction. Privacy by design, especially if you're a small company, a startup, it's so easy to do. And for large companies, because I offer a lot of consulting services to large companies, I say, wherever you are now, start. You don't have to undo everything you've done. Start from this point forward. Change it so that you involve your customers in the decisions you're making about their personal information. You alert them to your intentions as to how you wish to use their information. Give them a say in consenting to it, an opt-in model, and on, things of that nature. So I have been delighted with companies in Canada that have led the bar on this. For example, TELUS, one of our 3 major telcos. Amazing. TELUS has been certified on multiple occasions for privacy by design because it applies to various products and services that are offered. And they have multiple privacy by design certifications, and their customers love it. You know, the motto of TELUS is customers first, privacy first, and they walk the talk. It's all about walking the talk, and TELUS does that better than anyone.
Okay, I think we probably have time to squeeze in one more question, if that's all right.
Of course.
What is your take on algorithmic code disclosure standards popping up in governments everywhere? The question cites the Montreal Data Charter.
I really believe in algorithmic disclosure. People have to have an idea of how the data are being used. Just because, you know, AI is being used or various algorithms that may extend beyond the reach of the public, that doesn't mean anything. The people who are working in the government have to know how these algorithms are operating. If you don't know that, if there's no transparency associated with the way in which the algorithm functions, how do you know it's doing what it's expected to do, what it's supposed to do? How do you know that it's not intruding into areas that are supposed to be protected by privacy? You know nothing. If you just see the code, it means nothing. You have, you know, very talented people in the government who can understand algorithms if we have the disclosure of the algorithm, and then they can make a proper assessment as to A, is it doing what it's supposed to be doing? And B, is it invading privacy in ways that were never intentioned? We always have to look under the bar. It's absolutely critical. I do a lot of work in the area of AI now. And the same thing, you know, some people say, well, AI is like magical and there's no way we can know what it's doing or understand. That's garbage. Someone creates the code for AI and they have something in mind. You need to know how it's operating and if the code is in fact delivering what is expected. We always have to look under the hood. Trust but verify, always. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We really have squeezed in all the questions we possibly can. Thank you, Dr. Cavourkian. It was just wonderful to learn from you.
Thank you.
Also, I want to mention, I'm sure everyone is thinking about how wonderful your bookshelf is.
Sorry, this is one my office is at home.
So yeah, thank you, Dr. Cavourkian. Thank you to everyone who's joined us. We'll follow up with an email about the event in the next few days. So please feel free to respond to that email if you have questions you'd like to share it with us. And that's everything. Thanks once again.
My pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.